Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to Knights of the Storm. I'm so glad to see everybody with us today. Today, our guest is Courtenay Turner. Courtenay, we're so excited to have you.
Thank you.
My head is spinning from your new Substack.
Sorry.
That's okay. The pieces are coming together. And of course, we have Ashley this morning. Good morning, Ashley.
Good morning. Good to see you guys. Nice to be here.
And we hope that Jason has a good time today on his, I think he's doing a motorcycle run with some, for charity.
Ooh.
So he's having a nice break and getting out into nature a bit. And I think he's got some old buddies in town, so from the military. So that's awesome.
Fun.
So we don't have a verse of the week this week, but we're thankful to be here and to that Courtenay got the link that we had to send many times, and we're grateful for everybody in chat. So Courtenay has a new huge Substack. You want to tell us a little bit about that, the process, or why you decided to do this formidable piece of work at this point?
Sure. So yes, this was an incredibly exhausting task undertaking. But I feel like what it really built on was I did a piece called The Technological Age of Aquarius. I called it The Third Way Dream or Digital Dystopia. And that was really tying some of these Game B concepts and Game B figures to this third way political movement. And for those who aren't familiar, third way politics is born out of Fabian socialism. And Anthony Giddens wrote the famous book on third way politics. And he talks about how they're going to concentrate the radical center. So a lot of people, when they hear the center, they're like, oh, great, we're not going to be dealing with these idiotic like extremes, and we're going to be the normal moderate people. But remember, he says radical center. And he very explicitly states that it is always left of center, that it has to be for their emancipatory and social goals, right? So that's important to understand. When they say the center, they don't really mean just like moderates. It's really about, it's a strategy, it's a tactic. And remember, the Fabian socialists are the ones whose mascot is the tortoise, right? That's for the slow, steady incrementalism. They're long range planners, and they have lots of patience. So they'll wait centuries for their plans to come to fruition. And then, of course, the coat of arms is the wolf in sheep's clothing, which I think is a nod to this Hegelian dialectic that I talk about all the time. I'm in the middle of writing a book on it, but unfortunately I keep getting derailed with these other articles that are really kind of mini books. So this was like 85 pages, single spaced in Word. I know there were pictures and stuff, so it's not exactly that, but it was a lot. So I will be making it available. It's a process. I'm learning how to convert the formatting so I can make some of these really long articles into books on Amazon for people who want like a hard physical copy. I've had some requests for that. So I'm doing my best to learn how to do that and make that available to people. But so I did that article, and I saw how there's a very strong connection between a lot of these independent movements and the Game B circles and the Game B concepts and the technocracy. So we're of course hearing people like Elon talk about his American party, which doesn't sound American at all unless you think the technate that his grandfather envisioned is American. It doesn't sound American in the terms of a constitutional republic, the way I think of America. But if you think of the technate, that seems to be along the path that he's envisioning. And of course, who jumped on board to support him was people like Andrew Yang of the Forward Party, right? And their slogan is, it's not left, it's right, not right, it's forward. Sounds awfully progressive to me, which sounds left. And then, of course, who did he consult for this American party? Curtis Yarvin. And so then I wrote a piece. I've written several pieces along the way, mostly along the lines of this technocratic encroachment that we're seeing move at lightning speed. I mean, they weren't kidding when they talked about accelerationism, right? And I think it's no coincidence that we now have RFK, who his big slogan was Maha. And who could disagree with Maha? I mean, I'm all America healthy again. What a great message. But it did warn people. He's a big proponent of AI precision medicine. He wants to revive all of Obama's AI precision medicine plans, and I was very concerned about that. But here we are with MAHA, which he says is really about MABA. And so he's actually using the word accelerationism. It's all about Make America Biotech Accelerate. Like, wow,
Right.
how in your face is this? But even for the accelerationist, this is really moving at warp speed, pun intended.
Warp speed too.
Right? Yeah. And so then I wrote an article because I've been talking, I've done some videos. I know, I think you were even in the chat for one of them on, this dialectic that I see with they're both marching towards the technocracy, but we've got the right-hand path and the left-hand path. I see game B as very much the left-hand path, marching towards more of like a soft totalitarian type of democracy where you opt into your own tyranny, and there, it's the divine mother nurturing embrace, and you're going to feel all warm fuzzy with your decentralized, in quotes, because it's really not decentralized, but it sounds great to people who are freedom minded and maybe more libertarian inclined. And then you've got the right hand path of this very patriarchal kind of a muscular manosphere, more traditional, the
Dark MAGA.
Yes, right. So I wrote the Phoenix conspiracy to try and tie those ends together because I felt like people weren't quite seeing it, even though I kept saying it. But it's very different to see something in writing, right, than it is to hear somebody talk about these dialectical framings. And that was my analysis of how I saw things. And I'm not necessarily saying it's intentional, although I do think the overarching structure of the technocracy is intentional. But but how it's emerging, it does look like these dialectical pairs. The analogy I use is like if you have a fork in the road, and one is beautiful tree-lined streets and palm trees, and maybe you see beach, and the other one's more mountainous terrain, and you've got all the greenery and stone, and it, depending on which flavor you prefer for your scenic views, you can take one or the other, but they both end up at the same place. And that's kind of how I see these dialectical pairs. So I had written the Phoenix conspiracy to talk about that, and how, the thing that people often miss in this metaphor, the semiotics of the phoenix, they think about the bird rising up from the ashes, and that sounds so beautiful and aspiring. It's overcoming, but people often forget you have to burn it down first for there
Right.
just for it to rise up, right? Which sounds to me kind of like the Great Reset, or with Build Back Better, we got to tear down to build back better. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I wanted to ask some questions, some more basic questions. I did read up to part 3 of your stuff, and that helped me so much because I've talked with you before quite a bit, and I've read your materials, and I've listened to many of your podcasts with other people, and just the ones you do yourself. And I still wasn't connecting a lot of the names that you throw out because I don't have that background. I mean, when I went to college, I know Kant, Rousseau, Hegel, I know those names, but I read those when I was in college. That's a long time ago for me, and then I was more focused on my own interests, which was I was a biology major. So and I was a huge reader, but these types of things, I don't know this history. I recognize the names, but I can't put a past to these people. So especially, I know Barbara Marx Hubbard is one of those that you mentioned quite frequently, and I know others in our community, our podcast community, go back to Barbara Marx Hubbard. But reading your Substack, oh my goodness, that just brought it home what a monster this woman is. She said that we ride the pale horse of the apocalypse, that we are the ones who have to call society. I wish we could pull up the clip, actually, from your Substack, but we go ahead and go into that a little bit more about this woman, and maybe a couple of the other people like Jim Rutt, who was he the one who wanted the Emancipation Party?
Mhm.
And then to me, I was wondering if the Emancipation Party would be similar to the America Party, if it's just a kind of a rebranding. So maybe someone like Curtis Yarvin, talk a little bit more about his background, his philosophy, and then rage. You talked about rage, but for me, Barbara Marx Hubbard stood out, and also Jim. Was it Brockman? That's
Oh,
another. No, yeah, that
Education.
it was really great for me to finally sit down and follow your links and, get that background information because it makes more sense to me now.
Oh, I'm so glad it was helpful. Yes, it's a lot of names, it's a lot of concepts, and there are like nuances, but there's a theme kind of throughout all of these ideas people. So let's start with Curtis Yarvin because his is really pretty straightforward, and I know a lot more people are familiar with the Dark Enlightenment now. So many of them are surrounding the Trump administration. So it's getting a lot more press and publicity and coming to the forefront. I thought it was really funny when I saw a clip from CNN and they were saying how there's this guy, his name is Curtis Yarvin. He's been blogging for a decade. And but it's really dangerous because he has so much power over the Trump administration. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, he's been blogging for almost 2 decades, but who's counting? Apparently not you. Like, you really aren't paying attention. It's just that now that you have some ammo against Trump, you're in the fight and you want to know who Curtis Yarvin is. But they are right that his ideas are, in my opinion, horrifying. I mean, this is a very anti-human kind of a worldview. Him and Nick Land, they're both in my Phoenix Conspiracy article. I kind of outline them, and I am working on a book that ties some of those characters together as well. But they're in that right-hand path, as I call it, the Dark Enlightenment path, which is very autocratic. Curtis Yarvin says that the Americans need a reboot of the government and we need to get over our fear of dictatorship so that we can have a CEO monarch who can run the show smoothly like a startup. And he calls it SovCorp. Nick Land calls it GovCorp, but it's a very similar concept that we're not going to have these nation states. I mean, these pesky nation states with their laws and participatory self-governance. I mean, we can't have that. We need it to be run by technology. We need a CEO who hauls all the shots and runs it like a king. They call him right? They're essentially the dictator because if you run a small company, you call all the shots, and
Right.
that's much more efficient. That's what we need. And then he's got this concept of rage, which is it sounds so hyperbolic and incendiary, doesn't it? Rage. And he has this little poster behind him that spells out rage in his it was 2012 reboot speech, how we have to reboot the government, but is to retire all government employees. And now a lot of people were super excited, including myself, when I saw Doge getting rid of some of this bloated bureaucracy. I'm all in favor of that. I don't think we need to have a bureaucracy that's just wasteful spending and wasteful, too many cooks in the kitchen type of scenario. So it's great to streamline some of that. But I think the piece that a lot of people missed is so that you can replace it with algorithms and technology. And that I'm not so in favor of. So, I'm all for minimizing and using as little bureaucracy as possible while still running an effective administration. But I do not want to see algorithms or, AI replacing humans. So that I'm not in favor of. But that's very much what he talks about. And Nick Land talks about technoplastic being, which is exactly, I know both of you are really versed in this area that a lot of people think sounds like crazy sci-fi, conspiracy theory, whatever you want to call it. But there's so much evidence and research that they are really, how far along they are, we can debate, but that they are really trying to, create this emerging field of synthetic biology where we will really become cyborgs, where we're merging with machines. And there is a tremendous amount of research and funding invested in this area, and if you look closely enough, you see all it's in plain sight. It's really not as covert as people think. It's just so dystopian that I think it's very hard for people to wrap their heads around. But yes, Nick Land calls it technoplastic beings, and he's really saying
isn't he also the person who's highly into the occult and perhaps would be interfacing with demons or calling the old ones, as Geordie Rose called it, that type of thing?
He is so very inspired by people like Lovecraft and Julia Savola, and he has a term called hyperstition, where this is Nick Land, just for the audience, if you didn't catch who we were talking about, but he does talk about hyperstition, which is taking these fictionalized characters or ideas and manifesting them into reality. And he actually has one of his sites that I linked in my article, the Phoenix Conspiracy article, is actually Xenosystems. That was his old blog, xenosystems.demon.uk.
Oh my goodness.
He's got a whole, and then his new one is Xenogothic. So, I mean, he's very into the occult, very inspired by the occult for sure. So that's kind of the dark enlightenment. Obviously, we could go much deeper, but that's it in a nutshell. It's very top-down, autocratic. They say we have to get rid of democracy. It's all about hierarchical structures and these, CEO kings of the SovCorp or GovCorp. And so we're really going to be run like little companies as opposed to sovereign nations. And then who else were you mentioning?
That was the right-hand path.
So that's
and then there's the left.
because it's
That was
and then
okay.
the path.
Barbara Marx Hubbard.
Yes, and so I'll cover Jim first, and then we'll get to Barbara.
And Courtney, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but before we move on from Curtis Yarvin, I wanted to get your take on, so because you had talked about sort of his influence and his writing about things that really aligned with libertarianism, and do you feel like I don't know. To me, it sounds like that you have these NGOs, but probably also intelligence agencies that are factoring into the picture. And then he is, I don't know. It's a really interesting situation because he was kind of under the radar for a long time. He was going by Moldberg, and he wasn't really right. Yeah, or Doomberg, yeah. And that he wasn't really known exactly who it was, but he had been really in the space, and people in the liberty community, whatever that means, whether that was like the anarchist space or the libertarian space, big L, little l, whatever that was, they were interested. And there were some prominent people in the liberty space that were platforming him. So Pete Quinones comes to mind, that Pete was having conversations years ago with Curtis Yarvin, like well before he was tied to being so influential in whatever we're seeing at this time. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on what does, in everything that you've looked at, like, why did that happen? Was that a deliberate co-opting of a representative of these NGOs, of intelligence, to start getting the ears of people in the liberty community, or what was that about for them to specifically being on smallish podcast? You know what I mean? Like that really is it's very odd to me.
I think your spidey senses are on. I agree. I think it's very suspicious. It's curious at the very least. How is this kind of very fringe, very obscure, not American at all kind of ideas? And I personally have philosophical issues with libertarianism. It's a very constructivist philosophy. That doesn't mean that there aren't elements of it that don't resonate for me, and that there aren't people in the community that, I'm not being pejorative, as a whole, but, the underpinnings of it are, I wrote an article on the Kantian influence of the libertarian movement. And so if people are more curious about the philosophical underpinnings, they can read that, give a little insight into what my concerns are there. However, I think that even for true libertarianism, this is not authentic. I think this is a co-option and an infiltration. Right. They're using the banner because this way they can get both right and left. Right. And it's a much broader, people who are just liberty, quote unquote, minded, right? Who are anti-establishment. And so it's a really great way to capture people who recognize problems that are real problems. I mean, our system's obviously flawed, but newsflash, it was created by humans. It's going to be flawed. So in my opinion, unless it's a, God designed system, it's probably going to be flawed, right? That's one of the drawbacks of us, humans and all our foibles. However, I think our system is a pretty good system as far as systems go. The United States, particularly the Bill of Rights, predicated on the, precepts of the Declaration of Independence, is incredibly unique and incredibly powerful. But I do think they were using that to try and create this bigger umbrella. Now, in terms of how did this obscure Mencius mold bug even become a known figure to so many really prominent people? I think part of it is actually Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel invested in 2002 in his Yarvin project. I think he invested in 2002. I know that's when it was when he was working on it, the Yarvin project, which was one of these SovCorp kind of network state concepts. And Peter Thiel took a real interest, and I really think Peter Thiel propped him up. And Yarvin speaks to, because he does call out a lot of the problems that we see. And this is the same thing you see on both sides. Game B does a great job of pointing out some of these atrocities of Game A. Unfortunately, there are problems with our system. I don't think anybody denies that. That doesn't mean that the solution they're proposing is necessarily the better alternative. But I think that he calls out some of the things like the social justice warrior stuff that was going so far in one direction. And he was a counter to that. But of course, he was an extreme counter. He's promoting essentially like neo-Nazism with this ethnocentric kind of worldview. And it's really rooted in eugenics and I would say white supremacy. So that's not necessarily the way to handle the problems of the social justice warriors. So, but it resonates for people who see that. So,
well, and really quick, I'm going to hand it back over to you guys. But I just also wanted to say that is something that has been interesting to me in the ideology of P. Quinones. For people that were following him before, when he was really in the anarchist libertarian space, and then you have really seen this gradual shift to the work that he's doing now, or the content that he's creating now, and it really is quite radically different. And I'm not saying there isn't some value in some of the parapolitics that they are discussing and some of the information that they're laying down, but I would say that it is certainly, he's got a lot of hot takes these days. And so it's interesting that I don't know that it exactly coincided, but it certainly seemed like it was part of the transformation of having these conversations with Curtis. And then the other thing that I had heard, and I don't know if you know anything about this, but like that Curtis Yarvin was part of a gifted program that was involved, I believe, from Johns Hopkins, along with some other people who are also very influential in the environment that we find ourselves today. So if you have anything to say on that, I would love to hear it. And my point really is just that these people are hand chosen, is what it seems to me, from a very, very young age, and that it really gives a lot of credence to many, many layers removed. And as you said, it may have been your recent episode with Jay Dyer, that even a Peter Thiel, who seems like he's background, who seems like he's the puppet master, in no way is he actually the puppet master.
Yeah, so I have some suspicions, and I did talk about it on the episode with Jay. I have some suspicions and speculations, which are rooted in all of my research, but I can't say with certitude about the strings that may be pulling on Peter Thiel. I find that a lot less productive, though, because one, I don't have hard evidence. So I can't prove it. I can only point and say, well, we know he's got some Opus Dei ties from his connection, to his mentor back in Stanford. And I think it was Paul Arna was the priest that he was friendly with. I may be mispronouncing that, so sorry about that. But so we can say like it looks like there's some evidence pointing in that direction, but I don't have we obviously know Palantir is very directly tied to the military-industrial complex, but I can't say for sure what those strings are that are being pulled on him. But he's only a billionaire. He's not a trillionaire. As much money as billions is, I mean, it's hard for me to really wrap my head around and fathom what, billions of dollars looks like. But that's not my world. However, the trillionaires are really the ones pulling the big puppet strings, right? So, but the problem with that is that it gets us into this infotainment world where people are just speculating, and it becomes more like entertainment because there's not a whole lot of personal agency we have over that. I'm not saying that it's not worthwhile to investigate. I think it's important to understand the trajectory of these, various factions throughout history and the various strings that could be pulled, and to know that there is an overarching, structure. I'm not saying it's a one entity. Don't mistake me there. But that there are certainly people who would be in that strata above Peter Thiel. I think it's important to understand that. But to spend so much time focusing on that, there's not a whole lot we can do about it. We can do something about the things we can see. And I was really trying to map out the lay of the land that we have a tangible potential graph on. So yeah, that was so I agree with you on that. And I think I forgot the other part of your question. I apologize.
I don't even know if it was necessarily a question, but just the nature of these people kind of being handpicked and placed strategically. Yeah.
Yeah, so this Johns Hopkins, and I did see that, but I don't know exactly what the Johns Hopkins program was. So I will just share with you personally, and now it's going to be very public. I have mentioned this before, so it won't be the first time I'm mentioning it, but I don't talk about it too often. But I was part of the CTY Johns Hopkins program, and I always thought it was kind of like random. They give you, I think the way that it goes is that you're like, if you score over 1200 on the SAT under the age of 12, and this was, back in my day, so I think they do different things now, I'm sure, then you were recruited for this program. And I actually had forgotten all about this program until I moved out of California, and I was cleaning out, and I saw like a letter from my mom, like she was so proud, and she had like a picture of my welcome or my recruitment letter. And I had always thought it was totally separate from when I was 7 years old, the CIA tried to recruit me. And yeah, so, and I remember it super, super well. Like they told us the police was coming to the school. And, I was raised that the police are your friends. We are friendly with the police. And so, me being like, hi, everyone. It was a smaller town. And we were told they were going to put on a skit for us. And so they did a skit, and the whole thing seemed really strange to me. I won't give all the details, but the short version of the story is essentially they called each student down to the principal's office and asked us to recount what we saw. And I gave, a lot of detail, like what everybody was wearing, what color nail polish the ladies had, and where they were standing, what they said, whatnot. And they apparently called my mom to tell her that I had an eidetic memory and that they wanted to talk to her. And they were very overt. They said it was about recruitment for CIA. My mom said no. And but apparently they persisted for months. She said it was about 9 months where they kept calling. So I share this just to say that, they're obviously, because they say the line they gave her was that, this is such an honor. They tried to flatter her. They said, we don't really recruit children. We know that's not true from so many of the declassified.
Correct. Yeah.
They recruit children. So to answer your question, I can't say with certitude that Curtis Yarvin was handpicked, but we do know that there are, assets that are picked. And they certainly do groom and recruit people who they think will be valuable, whether it's to study them, whether it's to be change agents. There's enough evidence throughout history to indicate that might be something they do.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Karen. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I wanted to talk about, and I know you know so well that there was a parlor culture and the parlor meetings going way back. And I wanted to talk about parlor culture a little bit and how that translated right up into the Epstein and the New York billionaire meetings. Naomi Wolf talked recently about how she attended these billionaire meetings as a young author. And she said that there were men and women, all sorts. There were athletes, there were entertainment movie stars, musicians, authors, scientists. A lot of the scientists that you mentioned that were involved in the projects, the Weinsteins and many other authors. And they were, Brockman is the person who was involved with sending the invitations and arranging these fancy billionaire, quote unquote, gatherings of all these influential and brilliant young influencers, we would call them these days, influencers in all spheres, and that she was one of them. And she said that in one of the meetings she went to, or the gatherings, they're very high class, great food, maybe they'd be at a Broadway play or a fancy restaurant, and everybody's there, and you're afraid to say anything that will get you kicked out of the club. And so, that how they influence people, even though they may not be And they may not even know Jeffrey Epstein, but when Epstein walked into the room, she said that the men took notice, especially when Epstein walked into the room, and that they were whispers that he has just been accused of cavorting with young women. And instead of people seeming revolted, that people seem to be more interested in him. So she feels that there was a dragnet set in a way. Not only were these people funded, as you go into with your Substack, so many of these people received funding through Harvard and MIT and other places, but and perhaps their literature was influenced in what they ended up writing about, and the research was influenced, but also that there were many people who ended up not having really anything to do with receiving money or knowing Jeffrey Epstein personally, that she feels may be on these quote unquote lists because they attended these gatherings. And so I think that, and then we know that there's Tavistock, and then there was Stanford Research Institute in California.
Yeah.
My brother went to Stanford Children's Hospital. He was a child, he had childhood leukemia, and he's a survivor. But his program was completely experimental. He's one of the longest living childhood leukemia survivors. And he's in the medical books. But his doctor was completely experimental, but he was a wonderful humanitarian man. You know, he really had cutting edge practices. He believes in positive ideation, you know, the positive viewing and the keeping the family together with the patient, having campouts on the ward, and doing a lot of the positive humanitarian things for the child. So at any rate, so I did have this interaction with Stanford in the 70s with my brother. So I imagine my surprise when I realized how what else there is to know about Stanford. So also Naomi Wolf talks about growing up in Stanford or being in San Francisco in the summer of love and attending the clinic, where the infamous Haight-Ashbury Free Clinic, which they thought was just wonderful. I suppose as people do with Planned Parenthood these days. So there is a lot of grooming that goes on, and it's changed over time. So I wanted to, if you wanted to maybe pull that thread forward from the culture, the parlor culture.
Sure.
You know what I'm trying to get at?
I very much do. So I unfortunately, I know you sent it to me and I have not had a chance. I'm very looking forward to listening to Naomi talk about that. That's very interesting. You painted a really good picture of what she discussed. And yes, this is something I've talked quite extensively about, this social engineering through culture. Right? This is certainly something Tavistock is infamously famous for having been involved in, but it certainly wasn't just Tavistock. And I did a conference a few years ago. It was called Cause Fest. It was Creative Artists Uniting for the Sovereignty of Everyone. I was in the entertainment industry, right? I was an actress and a producer, and I'm an aerial acrobatic performer. So it was, like, I was never in the circus, but I was in that world. And
you are fabulous.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So but I really saw, and I never, made it very high up, but I was involved enough to see the social engineering that occurs, and certainly the propaganda that is, executed through assets and, these celebrity figures and just entertainers, because and this is not new, right? This has been going on since the days of ancient Greece. What better way to inculcate messages than through entertainment? Because human beings are so unique in that we can learn by proxy. I think it's one of the really special things about humans, right? I don't have to burn my hand on a stove. If I see somebody else do it, I probably don't need to learn from myself that that's a bad idea. Somebody walks through a door and breaks their nose, like, maybe I'm not going to do that. So this is some silly examples, but it is a really special thing about humans, and that's part of why we learn so much through stories. We learn through these various mediums, and they're also very emotional. They evoke so much intense emotionality, and we learn more when we're in a state of heightened emotion. So music has the power to transform people on a cellular level. So
absolutely.
It's powerful. All of these various, film, literature, movies, even just, dance, that kind of art, the aerial too. It's all of these various mediums. So of course, these artists become great assets for propaganda. And I think since really the dawn of man, we go back millennia, they've kind of recognized this, and the mediums have changed. Obviously, they didn't have film back in 2,000 years ago, but they certainly had theater, and they had when they had the written word, they were using that. So the technology has advanced, and to be able to congregate in person, we know, I think, even more viscerally since the past few years, how powerful being in physical proximity to other human beings, right? To be able to have that discourse and collaboration, and to really flesh out ideas and build camaraderie, and and even discord. You learn through that, but in person is very different than
Absolutely.
arguing with someone. You do that in person, you can't help but, if you're not a psychopath, you can't help but see the humanity in their eyes, and even if you don't agree with them, that resonates for you. So
Well, we have an energy field that interacts.
we absolutely do. Yeah, the heart has an electromagnetic field up to 12 feet is what they've
Right.
and some people are actually literally more magnetic than others. Use that term. There's actually some science behind it.
Oh, absolutely. I agree 100%. 100%.
So I think then you, on top of it, you layer these people who have a lot of money. So the amount of influence they're able to wield in these circles through the entertainment mediums, the culture, and then the financial injections, it makes all the sense that this would be a great forum for influence operations. And oftentimes when you see these very highbrow types of parlors, and this is throughout history, it is not unique in this regard. It's just that the topics they were covering have such a vast potential ramifications for the field of science and for the future of humanity. That's part of why I was looking into it, because certainly influence operations are not new at all, and they have tremendous historical impact throughout the history of politics and culture. But this was definitely intriguing to investigate the scientific influence that they were using these artists. And Brockman was a literary agent, so he had access to all of these very high profile types of individuals.
Naomi said that he was very influential in arranging these. He was her agent also. Naomi Wolf's agent, literary agent, and that he played a great role in organizing these. So you want to talk more about the Edge Foundation? You kind of glanced over it, but
oh yeah, okay, I'll go to that first. Yeah, so the Edge Foundation is it started, I want to say, was it 2015 or it was in the mid 2000s, but it was this where they would have the billionaire dinners, as you mentioned. So that was they were very famous for those. And they would have these salons where the top, as you mentioned, Naomi was discussing, it was artists and athletes and very high profile people, but definitely a lot of brilliant scientists were attending these. And they had this annual questions, which was the last question series is what it was titled. And I did a little looking into this, and I thought it was very interesting that the Weinstein brothers had both posed a question in 2018, and their questions were quite intriguing. So we had Brett Weinstein, who is one of the founders of Game B, which is a movement I've been looking into quite extensively for a while.
The guru or the rabbi?
So that's Eric. Eric is known as the rabbi of Game B.
Okay, Eric's the rabbi. Okay, I have to get that
Eric
straight.
is the rabbi. So Eric is kind of the more like a Brockman, as you mentioned, the facilitator. He put together this whole economic Manhattan Project in 2009 that was a response to the financial crisis of 2008, and it was in conjunction with Edge Foundation and the Perimeter Institute. And at this speech that he gave, and it was a whole event, but it was his idea, it was his brainchild, and he put it together. He did a speech, and he did talk about, he used the term Plan A and Plan B. He didn't say Game B or Game A, but he said Plan A, Plan B, and it was very much in reference to the economic principles. So, it was relegated to mostly that sector. But Jordan Hall went to that. He was brought in, I think, by Lee Semmelin. I may be mispronouncing his name. I apologize if I have. But Lee Semmelin, I believe, is the one who introduced him, and Seb Piquet. I think he was actually the one who told him about it, but they knew Lee. And so these circles, which are Game B circles, started to form. But it was Eric who insisted that Jordan and Brett really get to talking. And Jordan explained that they really didn't start talking about these concepts it took a bit. It took a few meetings. But there was, so I'll tell you the questions before I move on. But the questions were, so Brett's was, can humans set a non-evolutionary course that is game theoretically stable? Which, I mean, my Game B wheels were turning. That sounds very Game B. So I was very intrigued. What does he mean by that? What was, what's going on there? And then Eric said, does something unprecedented happen when we hack our own source code? Which
Right. Hack our source code.
Our own source code.
So, and then we ended up a little bit down the road with CRISPR coming out of this, didn't we?
Yes. So CRISPR is definitely connected to all of this. This is the genetic engineering kind of technology. And a lot of them are very in favor of this, type of, I would call it positive eugenics, where we modify human genetics to create the augmented human or super soldier, whatever term you'd like to use. But that's kind of the premise behind it. And I know I didn't get to Jim Rutt, but I can talk about Jim Rutt and then go to Barbara Marx Hubbard if you'd like.
Sure.
You have more questions before that. Either way.
If you have a train of thought that you'd like to follow through, go right ahead.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Either way.
Well, and I had a quick question. So one of the things that you're talking about is that it must be, as much as they may try to make this sound centrist and good for the most amount of people, what do you believe is the reason that it must be left of center? And you've talked about this a lot. So like the right of center, the left of center, we're heading to the same place, but why do you think that it really must be towards the left?
So I have a couple of thoughts on it. Of course, Giddens specifically says that it's for these social ethics and emancipatory goals. That's the auspices of why. But I think it's because left tends to orient towards more collective types of, a worldview, policies. It's much more collectivist oriented. So I think that's a huge part of it, because their whole goal is to create this hive mind. And the right tends to, if we look at it as a spectrum, I mean, the spectrum has been so, manipulated. It's really much more of a means for marketing, to create audiences to market to in order to sell them the various flavors that they're trying to execute. But if we do look at it that way, the right, if you went to the end of the right, it's almost like extreme anarchy, right? Which is like complete radical individualism, which of course does end in collectivism. That's where it boomerangs, right? Even Karl Marx said the goal was the complete obliteration of the state, right? So essentially it leads to self-apotheosis, right? We become our own gods collectively, with the world Geist. That's the Hegelian reference for it. So, I mean, the extremes end up, spiraling towards the omega point. But I think that in terms of process, the left tends to be much more collectivist, and they're much group oriented, and they're much more politically minded as well, right? We do see this all the time. The right will get upset about things, they'll get vocal and boisterous, but when it comes to really getting involved at local activism, the right is not nearly as motivated, at least historically speaking. We haven't seen that from the right. They get very inspired every 4 years when it's about the presidential campaign. Suddenly they have lots to say, but when it's really about what they claim to be in favor of, which is local action and decentralization, we don't see a whole lot of involvement from them. And oftentimes people speculate it's because they're focused on their families and making a living and their day-to-day. And I can appreciate that and respect that, but it still means that for effective long-term planning, the left is going to be a better arm to operate through, because
Yeah.
great at the long march through the institutions.
That makes so much sense. You're so right about that. It's something that Brad Binkley has talked about a lot, right? This is the left activist groups, and they are they're very, very good at rallying the troops. They're very good at having the system. This is what we're going to tell you to say. These are the talking points, the bullet points. And you're right. I do think because a lot of their ideology does align with like a progressive youth, it is more easy for them to sort of get those people in, and they also they communicate with them on the level that they are used to. They are very big on social media activism, on like getting people out, giving them these talking points, giving them like the arguments and all these kinds of things. So I think that's a really good point, that they are so much better at activating those types of people for the message. So, and then of course, like the youth, like all of us have been indoctrinated, of course. And if we're going through the, like in a public school system, or just in like exactly what you're talking about with movies and entertainment and all of these kinds of things. But generationally, of course, I think that a lot of these principles that we've been indoctrinated with are building. And so these kids today, a lot of them, although there does appear to be some backlash against that, but a lot of them, you just accept that this is how it is, and it has built generationally. So that makes a lot of sense in that regard. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
We were talking earlier, Ashley and I, you were having your issues with the link, and we were talking about how communitarianism has really been given a bad rap, that actually and the way that semantics and language are used, there's a lot of new language, a lot of repurposing of old language in the way that we tend to be moved socially. But if you think about the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, or the way that what Jesus said, how we should treat each other and treat the earth, be steward, those are all what could be construed as a form of being related to communitarianism, taking care of the group and being having empathy and compassion, which is a good thing, but it's being branded as and that's being perverted and weaponized. I feel by
I would differentiate between community, being community oriented and being involved in a community, and communitarianism. Communitarianism is a very specific kind of ideology, and it is a third way ideology. It is tied to third way, and in fact, the UN actually explicitly says that. That third way is communitarianism, and it's in the American culture. This was kind of branded through Bush, right? He talked about compassionate conservatism, which was
1,000 points of light.
Pardon?
1,000 points of light.
Yes. So this is really, this is really communitarianism. They have different names, they brand it differently, but communitarianism it is not what like Jesus is talking about, where you're involved and invested in your community. Ultimately, the core community is your family, right? And we eroded in favor of communitarianism. And now it's all about your communal, right? Like communal compounds, which is essentially communism, right? But it's very, very different. It's this they call it a like hybrid between putting attention on the individual and the community, which sounds great, except that their focus is not. It's not about, like I said, like where you're having compassion for your community. Your community is your direct community, so it's your family, and then your extension of that, whether that be your religious communities, your school, whatever community you're involved in. And of course, you should have you should have compassion and empathy, but that's just because you love your fellow man, and you're also directly involved. I would think that in your community, you're invested because this is part of your circle. So of course you'd be invested. But what they're really talking about is, I think the best way to drive this home is these network states. This is really going to be a way of creating distributism. It's a way of using technology to tokenize and lead us into these isolated kind of tokenized environments. And that's really where they're going with this communitarianism idea. And this was laid out pretty explicitly. Rosa Koire did call it out, back in the 80s. So it's not new. It's just now we're seeing so much more of it because the plans are rolling out with more rapidity now. So
Rosa Koire did a great job.
She was great.
Yeah.
Yep.
We never got to Barbara Marx Hubbard. I'm sorry but
Jim Rutt first. So Jim Rutt was one of the founders of this Game Bee. You had asked about the Emancipation Party and if the American Party was like a rebrand of this. I don't know that it's directly a rebrand. I think it's very reminiscent of it. It's got that redundancy of the Emancipation Party. And the Emancipation Party was back in 2013. Jim Rutt was trying to create it. He had these Stanton meetings in Stanton, Virginia, where they were trying to create a platform that very aligned with what I would see as like a Bernie Sanders type movement. They want universal health care. It was a variant of universal basic income. They didn't necessarily call it that, but it had that it had elements of that. So these types of platforms and what he calls liquid democracy, which at first sounds great, but again, it's this third way. It's right. It's a hybrid of republicanism and democracy. Only we've got now algorithms in the mix, and we're going to use blockchain voting. So I'm not really sure how the participatory self-governing element falls into play there when you've got smart contracts running the show. Smart contracts running the show. But so Jim Rutt is a very interesting character, clearly a very bright guy, went to MIT. He's been in all the circles. He was involved in like evolutionary AI software, computing, and he was, on the ground floor of a lot of startup tech ventures. He's told a story of actually helping this young guy to raise money for a tech venture, and it turned out that it ended up being T-Mobile. So he was Network Solutions, the domain name. So he's been on the ground floor of a lot of pretty big things, and he's involved in all of these kind of tech innovations and certainly the financial end of that as well, the venture capital firms. So he gets recruited for the Santa Fe Institute, which I talk about quite a bit in this article, but he ended up becoming the chairman of the Santa Fe Institute, and it was overlapping with the time that Jordan Hall was at the Santa Fe Institute. Jordan Hall was one of the board members at the Santa Fe Institute. Jordan Hall also has a tech background, like he's involved like MP3, I think it's called DVX. So he was involved in also some pretty big and he's on the ground floor of some of this Web3 technology now. They don't usually use his name, but I've seen him in the dialogues because I watch way too many of these videos. I've seen him talking, and you can kind of tell from the, like they'll promote certain things and they'll be like, oh, Jordan promoted this, so you can kind of connect the dots there. But he was also, I'll just mention this briefly, but Qualia Life. And I did find the SEC filing and it's in my article, apparently he did a bridge loan for the early seed funding for this Qualia Life. I've been very kind of intrigued by Qualia Life. It was formerly known as Neurohacker Collective, and it became Qualia Life, but they've got this board that's like 60 or so people. It's insanely huge. And it's names like Deepak Chopra, like every kind of medical expert, definitely the medical freedom people. It's a lot of, the trusted network initiative kind of people who are in that medical freedom space. But not just freedom. There's a lot of like evolutionary leaders, right? Like Deepak Chopra, a lot of these, Oprah adjacent types. Bruce Lipton is in there. Exactly. So I've been a little intrigued by it because it's couched as like cognitive enhancement. It's very transhuman adjacent terms like longevity. I can't make the claim they're doing, and it may be very innocent. I honestly don't know, but it's intriguing because of
death.
And does this also tie in with like the biohackers, the people that we see who basically make it their entire online presence and everything that they do?
True. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And they, these people become influencers, and it's actually very interesting. And I know that we've got to get to Barbara Marx Hubbard, and I want to hear that. But the other thing is that in talking about, what does Bobby Kennedy support? And we have Make America Healthy Again. And then we do have these people who were on his same page during the COVID pandemic, right? And I find that very interesting. What is the play of having like the Weinstein brothers sort of be on the side of reason during this? Is it a trust building? Is that the same point of Children's Health Defense Fund, right? They say a lot of good things and they've educated a lot of people. But then we see somebody who's very intimately associated with them, Bobby Kennedy, now come into the position that he's in and telling us that we need to be wearing wearables. And then we have it also ties in with like obviously Joe Rogan, and you've talked about some of the people that he's platformed and that has been part of the Dark Enlightenment. It has been the Weinstein brothers, and also he has platformed Dr. Rhonda Patrick, and she was one of the first people that really came into the space and started talking about, well, broccoli sprouts are associated with reducing your cancer risk, and the sulforaphane is very helpful for you. And the fish oil that I take is especially from Norway, or whatever that is, right? So you had somebody to really start talking about that and tying in with his company and his supplements, Alpha Brain. Like, it's really back to what you're saying, network. But it's fascinating because it almost is like a mycelium network, because it's so many different areas, but they are all connected in all of these ways. And it's the frustrating part is because some of this does sound so good. It sounds like, yes, this is the path that we need. This makes sense to me. This is logical. This is healthy. And these influencers are on the forefront of that, and then you start finding some of these really nefarious connections. So it's it ain't easy out here in these streets, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
There's a huge space for the precision AI health. That's a huge space. The young, healthy, not so young, but people who are into fitness and health, and it's a huge space. So there's a huge market for that, and an audience that may not be quite so aware of these things as we would be.
Right. Well, so I have a lot of thoughts on that. So I do think, there's that whole adjacency, right? We've got RFK, whose campaign manager was Charles Eisenstein, who wrote the book on sacred economics, which is this whole principle of like the regenerative economic system that Game B wants to adopt. And then, of course, Charles Eisenstein is connected to Christopher Life. They in helping him with the United Independence Party and movement. He had like the One Nation Party. He rebranded the name of his party a few times, but he's also a disciple of Barbara Marx Hubbard. Has cross-pollinated with Daniel Schmachtenberger. But the United Independence Movement is a huge movement, which, is operating these third way politics, right? Andrew Yang was part of it. They did this whole event, the Independent National Convention. I cannot get that, it's behind paywall, and I've even gone to the Wayback Machine, so I can't get videos, but I did get some screenshots from the Wayback Machine. But Brett Weinstein did a keynote speech, 7 o'clock. I think it was in April, like 5th or something. I might not have the date exactly right, but it was 2023. I know that. And he was 7 o'clock keynote speaker. And it was at this Independent National Convention. Then a year later, he's at Rescue the Republic, talking about how we have to phoenix the Republic. And they were doing pictures of the phoenix in this 2023 Independent National Convention. And then, of course, in Denver, the next year, 2024, they do this United Independence Convention. And Brock Pierce was very involved and helped, the funding of this Christopher Life's, big event and movement. And of course, Brock Pierce, he's a whole rabbit hole, but, tied to Bannon, and he was like the crypto guy. He was a child actor. He has ties to Epstein as well, and I do go through some of that in my Epstein article. But so it's very interesting because what is this child actor even doing in this space, and what was the cryptocurrency back in the early 2000s? What was the relevance? But I think it's because they're building this whole infrastructure for technocracy, and so of course then cryptocurrency becomes very relevant. And so we see this RFK kind of it felt very much like a honeypot. I can't prove that. I can't say that, it was a controlled opposition movement, but it certainly feels that way. And I do feel like there's a lot of bait and switch. Now, I personally warned a lot of people even before Trump got elected, and it was not popular because I think people wanted to be excited, and I don't want to take away some sort of hope because we can't be demoralized and function if we're constantly demoralized. However, I wanted people to be aware that Maha sounds great, and I'm all for Maha. Let's get rid of these pesticides. Let's get rid of these seed oils, and let's get rid of big pharma running everything. I'm not saying there's not value to pharmaceuticals in certain time and place, but it shouldn't be the go-to, and certainly not without informed consent. So, I was really trying to warn that this messaging sounded great, but he's such a proponent of the AI precision medicine. And to allude to what you're saying about these influencers in this space, what I've noticed is I've had this theory. It is a theory, so I can't prove this. Just I'm putting it out there as pure speculation. But I do think that the Knights of Malta, who used to be the Knights of Hospitaller, were instrumental in infiltrating this medical freedom movement. I don't know whether or not they seeded it or whether they infiltrated. Like I said, it's all theoretical, and it's just me looking at the big mind map in my head and saying I see some connections, but their exoteric messaging even to this day is that they do medical charity. And so it looked like, regardless of whether they were involved or not, and this is not to tarnish all Maltas, I know personally people who have been and they're wonderful people, so it's not what I'm saying. Individuals are very different than organizations, especially at the top level. But I do think that there was some sort of a purpose to shift the Overton window. And where I'm going with this, to get to your point about these influencers and the space being rife for this, this AI precision and the wearables and this technologically driven type of health incentives, is that the Overton window now shifted, and traditionally the people who were the my body, my choice, and I don't just mean in the abortion conversation, because those tended to be more, but it was in the medical space, right? If I don't want to take something pharmaceutical, I won't. It was like the stereotype was the crunchy mom who would make homeopathic tinctures and would use natural solves before using any antibiotics, right? And that was the stereotype. And largely a lot of these people were on the left. That's how they identify. If you ask them, they were either apolitical, anti-establishment, or they voted Democrat their whole life. And suddenly they got slapped with this label. They're right wingers now, quote unquote, right? Air quotes for those who are not watching and listening. But they were libertarians, or they were Republicans or conservative, and so many of them were confused. I mean, genuinely confused. No, I've been a Democrat my whole life. And they're like, okay, I guess I'll wear the banner now. I'm a right winger. I'm a conservative, a libertarian. I vote Republican, whatever it was. But this is how the Overton window shifts. So now you've got this whole conflation. And this is what I saw with the intellectual dark web too, right? You had this anti-woke movement, and it's like, most of this intellectual dark web was, with the exception of maybe Ben Shapiro, although I'd classify him as more of a neocon than really a conservative, but most of them were on the left, which
define the intellectual dark web.
Yeah, so the intellectual dark web was this movement in the late 20-teens, and the figures of very prominent kind of household names like Jordan Peterson, the Weinstein brothers. Eric Weinstein actually coined the term, and I linked a video of him talking about coining the term. He's using all Game B vernacular in this. It's like a 20-minute video, but it's all Game B.
Yeah, he's a real snake.
Yeah. So he,
My opinion.
yeah. So, Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, and Joe Rogan wasn't officially, I don't think, but he was like adjacent and platformed a lot of this intellectual dark web. But a lot of them had conversations around the culture at the time. And, what I kept telling people is most of these people are traditionally on the left. I mean, Jordan Peterson never claimed to be a conservative. He's a Canadian liberal. Like, it's
Right.
a very different thing than a American conservative, constitutional conservative.
Oh, you bet.
Right. But suddenly they were, like photobombing him with pictures of Pepe the Frog, saying he's all right. And it's all narrative creation. Right. But what I saw with it is that I'm trying to point out to people, just because these are people who think a man is a man, a woman is a woman, does not make them conservative or right wing. This is just basic biology,
Right.
People, but this is reality,
Well, and that was part of what was so people got so beaten down, so exhausted from the insane messaging about the exact, like, very basic things that you're talking about. Basic biology. We have Ketanji Brown. Well, I can't define what a woman is. And of course, yes, very clown world, very silly, but it is so representative of the absolute nonsense that people had forced down their throat for many, many years now. And I think that it was so genius because you really got these people demoralized. So all it takes is somebody like where you're talking about this Canadian liberal to get on Joe Rogan and to cry and to talk about clean your bloody room, eh? And that's like all it took, right? And then exactly what you said. And so many of these people are Rogan adjacent, but then he starts he's connecting with Jonathan Pajou or Pajot, my apologies for, yes, who is known for symbology in orthodoxy. And then, like what you're talking about, now he's on the payroll for the Daily Wire, and they have the Ark and all of these things. So it's very interesting to have been observing all the threads of this from many, many years ago, from 2016 or whenever he was first on the scene with Rogan, to sort of really see the evolution of where it has gotten to this point and how they really have been able to steer that narrative to exactly what you're saying, that these people are not conservative. And that's one of the things I think that you talk about a lot in like this post political world, because what are any of these things anymore? They have no meaning. And Twisted over on X was saying that's like MAGA is left now. Yeah, it's all over the place. None of these things actually are consistent with what we used to know them to mean. And then I think the other thing that I find very interesting is that it ties in a lot with when you're talking about, and I know Karen talked about your Substack, but I just wanted to let everybody know that I dropped that in the chat, or message me if you want it, but I highly recommend them checking out, especially this most recent article, because you have really done so much deep diving on all of these many issues that you could just go on and on and on out into the universe in studying one issue like the game plan B. But you give these definitions, and that's another thing Karen and I were talking about before we started, is that basically these things, it's like an entire new vocabulary. Like a lot of people in this space are going to be familiar.
It was too much to do with this one. It was just too much work. This was exhausting.
I'm sure.
You did a great job, though.
Thank you. I think
really
the links for the bibliography, like literally. So, but there will be a glossary coming, because you're right. It's jargon. It's a whole new vocabulary.
It truly is. And I honestly feel like that, because I firmly believe that we're in the midst constantly of information warfare, psychological warfare, that is a big part of the game, is peppering people with so much information that you can't possibly keep up. So you need to decide and pray for your discernment and try to decide on the area that you want to pursue, that you think is important for you to become educated on, right? And in your work, you did a really good job of noting all of these different threads, many things that wouldn't seem related until you do this deep dive work and you really are making the connections. But it is a new language. And the other thing about this is that you have this constantly evolving vocabulary. And you talk about this quite a bit, that, oh, it was this organization and now it's this organization. It was this party and now it's this party. And they went by this and now they're this. And I just find that to be very interesting. And, you know, maybe not something so obvious until you start pointing out, like, look at how often they do this with the newspeak, with the, you know, and it also ties in with what they did to us in COVID, that we have these real time changing history, changing information, and changing definitions almost every single day. And so just, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but I'm just pointing out the things that you really tie together with your work that helps put this puzzle piece together. So definitely go check out Courtenay's Substack, and especially this most recent article, because it touches on so many things that we're discussing today.
And I went ahead and subscribed to your.
I did too.
And I mean,
Yeah.
not subscribed as a paid member, and I should have done it a long time ago. I'm sorry.
And
But yeah, so by the time I got to I read this morning for an hour and a half or so, and had wanted to cover a lot more, but I found myself clicking the links and investigating who these people are, who these organizations are, and I'm fairly reasonably intelligent, you know, and I've listened to you talk quite a bit, but still a lot of these connections hadn't happened with the names and the events, and because it is a completely new vocabulary. And these are new characters, a lot of whom I haven't seen their faces. They are more behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So it really helps. So I highly recommend, go ahead and subscribe to Courtenay's Substack and take the time to do the reading. You will understand so much better what's going on now with events and also with Epstein, and why perhaps the files are not, whatever the files are, you know, are not being released, and the names, and the great part that he played in funding all of the things that were the agendas that we're talking about here today. And I wanted to mention Carrie Mullis was also, Naomi Wolf said Carrie Mullis was at the billionaire dinners that she went to also in New York. So that, and then a lot of these meetings happened at Harvard too. And that doesn't mean he did anything wrong. He was just he was brilliant, young science mind, and they wanted to make sure that he was in their purview. So at any rate, so yes, and did you ever finish your Tallow? Is your Tallow, is it available?
we're so close. We have designed. We literally have a factory.
Oh, wow.
We've created, my husband has completely designed this system. So the really important thing for us was to be able to make sure that there is no water, because water, and this is what's going to make ours really unique. You know, I'm not trying to, you know, be pejorative to anybody else's tallow, but it's really hard to get the water out in the rendering process, and water is what breeds bacteria. And so dealing with it's cow fat, right? So this is a biological substance. So we really wanted to minimize any potential for bacteria growth, because people do, you know, we need it to be shelf stable. And so we have figured that out. The other thing is that we are going to be working with influencers, so like yourself, if to be able to, you know, give you some sort of income from it, as well as discounts for your audience. And we wanted to ensure that that's a bulk process, and we're kind of doing this by hand. So we wanted to make sure that we were equipped, and we've designed a process where we will be able to make like a few hundred bottles at a time. So we could make like 1,000 to, you know, 2,000 in a weekend, which hopefully we can keep up with the demand, so that we're not disappointing people.
Yeah.
And, we have our signature formula is done. I do have a couple of little creative impulses to try some other formulas. So we are so close. I'm really hoping by September we're going to launch. That's
okay.
Wonderful. Yeah, that's another issue, is that a lot of, and we talk about this a lot in the natural health space, is that we have so many endocrine disruptors, we have so many estrogenic chemicals that are in everything, shampoo, conditioner, moisturizer, all the things for the face, all of this stuff. So getting yourself a nice, healthy, natural moisturizer is huge. And to be able to support your business while doing it would be really amazing. And I'm always looking for, like polyunsaturated fat free and minimal chemical stuff to be trying to use on my face and my, like my daily routine. So
Yeah.
exciting.
Top of the line, like medical grade medicinal, manuka honey. It's 20 UMF plus. It has never been heated. It's completely raw, so it's not pasteurized at all. We have like Madagascar grade vanilla, so you're actually going to see the little vanilla black flecks in it. This is really top. Our margins were decreased a bit by it, but I was unwilling to compromise because it's so important to me that if we're going to do something that's a clean, quote unquote, clean product, that it truly lives by that, and that we need more of those options, right? Because we have
100%.
Yeah. Let me know when it's ready. Every time I see Courtenay, I say, "Is your tallow ready?"
I know, and I'm so grateful. I'm sorry it's taking us a little bit.
That's okay. I want it to be the best. And I know you're a perfectionist, so I know that it will be. And your husband seems like he's fantastic.
He's amazing. Yes. And he's really brilliant, and he's so industrious. So yeah, he wants to make it the best possible. And he's a very like entrepreneurial minded. So he really understands like the funnel system, like how we have to have something that's ready to go. Because the last thing we want is to be launching and then not equipped.
Right.
So, he understands all that. And so that's what we're prepping for. And I really appreciated, I debated putting this behind the paywall, but it wasn't so much to, gate people. It was much more about honoring those who have supported my work. I'm so incredibly grateful to anybody who wants to hear anything I have to say, read anything I write, and I wanted to honor them. So it was really more of a gratitude piece than it was because this was a tremendous amount of work. So I'm all that to say, I really appreciate it. I know that, there's so many things to spend money on, and it's a finite resource. So I'm always grateful. It never goes taken lightly. So. Yeah.
Well, it's truly educational. I mean, honestly, I feel like probably if they go through this one Substack article, this is the equivalent of, a university class, honestly, and then some. Truly, there's so much information here. There's so many connections to be made. So it's really, really important, I think. And this is one of the things that Karen and I were also discussing, is that this really starts to bring together a lot of these pieces. So we can see this and we see, okay, we have an issue with health. We have an issue that they're combining health and tech. We have an issue with tyranny or whatever that may be. But it doesn't always necessarily make sense. Like, why is this person being platformed by Joe Rogan, the most successful podcaster in existence? Like, what are you doing there? So it really starts to help us bring a lot of these pieces together and really kind of understand what's going on in that way. Although there's still a lot of questions there, right? Like and I think we still want to get to Karen's questions on Barbara Marx Hubbard. But the other thing I was thinking about, for me, I'm listening, I'm thinking, and I'm like, this is so challenging because some of these things they're not all bad, right? And because it's because of the system that we have been presented with, Plan A, then it definitely makes you want to look to alternatives to that. And I don't think anyone could blame you for that, right? Because obviously there are problems, just like what you were talking about earlier. So it's just a really interesting things to think about and a weird place to be, I think, as a human who wants to move forward in the right way, but this is still the world that we live in.
Sure. I will just say, I know, this was just an innocent statement, but I'm hearing a lot of people say plan A, plan B when I bring this stuff up. And I can't help but my spidey senses feel like it's a disinfo kind of tactic so that people aren't familiar with game A, game B. So I'm very explicit in saying it's game B.
Yes, good.
they're talking about Brett Weinstein's question, right? Game theoretically stable. And I'm not saying game theory is all bad, or that we shouldn't do any game theoretical modeling. That's not what I'm trying to imply. But this is very much around creating a game theoretical model. So it is game theory. So this is when they talk about game A, that's really, it's very specific. So I do think it's important to use that language. And that is what they're saying. Game B is something very specific, although it hasn't come to fruition yet. It's in development. It's more conceptual at the moment, and it's not a monolith. So even Jim Rutt, and I did point this out in my article, he comes from the background of complexity theory, tech. He envisions himself as much more of a scientist, hard scientist. He said that there was a schism in the group, that there were people who were very focused on institutional reform, this emancipation party, which, I do see as this third way kind of movement. It's this post-partisan type of politics, which we're seeing really rise with this United Independent movement now. We're seeing that, really percolate and grow. But so he envisions himself really focused on that institutional reform, hard science, although I think we could debate whether complexity science is really hard science, but we'll leave that for a conversation for another day. And then versus these people who thought it was much more on the onus of spiritual evolution and spiritual, conscious evolution, that type of, which ties to Barbara Marx Hubbard. And so there was a schism, they did reconnect. But I think it's important to note that, it's not a monolith, and that there are so many factions and aspects of these type of movements. But what I really try to, impress upon people is what the shared underpinnings of this, it is eugenics. It is, whether it be spiritual eugenics or biological, or this like genetic kind of positive, quote unquote, eugenics, using the synthetic biology and CRISPR technology. It is all rooted in something that is very similar. But that was how, so the movement did divide, they did reunite, and there was one faction that was much more inspired by Barbara Marx Hubbard. I will just add one more thing when I was talking about the whole medical freedom movement. And part of what I've seen is that the people who are in that more holistic, and again, I don't mean this to be derogatory, but like crunchy kind of space, they're much more rife for planting these hermetic principles. All is in the mind. You can heal with your thoughts. And I'm not saying that your thoughts aren't powerful, or that positive mentality isn't valuable, but it creates this very non-realistic kind of a framework. And I think people who are in that space are much more susceptible to that type of hermetic, alchemical, even Gnostic type of principles. And so they're steering people who were, and it's that time period was really rife for it, because you had so many people who were horrified by the mainstream medical system. And so they're thinking, okay, well, this is the better place for me to go. But that doesn't mean that everything that they're promoting is rooted in reality, or and I think there are a lot of people who do have good intentions, but there is an agenda behind it. And this, movement towards this technological, and even again, as you had mentioned, there are wonderful things they can do. I mean, I don't think wearables are all bad. I think it's great for people to have some data that they could, the problem becomes when it becomes surveillable and controllable and programmable. That's where the problem lies. It's not so much that it's bad for somebody to be able to calculate using a device how many steps they took, or, if their blood sugar spiked. Although that technology actually does increase insulin, ironically, because of radiation that's tied to it. A lot of people don't realize that. So it's kind of like a counterproductive in some ways. But, there's a time and place for these technologies, and they can do some tremendous good. My concern is when they're being used to surveil people, when they're coercively enforced, or worst, like whether it's just being enticed or actually being forced to use them, and when it becomes part of a control grid where they're mining all of your biometric data. So that's where I have a problem with it. But that does seem to be where they're going. But it's all under the guise of opt into this. And of course, a lot of people in that space are much more susceptible and suggestible to that. So, all right. So Barbara Marx Hubbard, she is she's quite the character. She was a disciple of Teilhard de Chardin, intellectual and spiritual disciple, very much, subscribed to this notion of us being part of a noosphere, which is this kind of a planetary mind. She used to talk about a planetary grin, and she believed in spiritual evolution. There's this concept that you evolve or die, and she actually used that term. And so, as I mentioned, we have the more biological evolution, which is Brett Weinstein, of his own admission, is part of why he was brought into Game B and into these, Stanton meeting, Emancipation Party discussion, because so much of it is predicated on the theory of evolution, which, as I point out in my article, is a little bit hubristic, just because they're treating it as if it's fact. And it is still a theory, and it's actually a widely contested theory, although it's very much accepted in a lot of the scientific community. That doesn't mean, or what did Richard Feynman say? There are many questions that cannot be answered, but there are no answers that cannot be questioned. So the whole premise of science is that nothing's actually proven. It is
That's true.
Right?
There is no settled science.
No. Absolutely not. The whole premise of the scientific method is that you present evidence, you conduct experiments, and you have a hypothesis, you test it, and then the evidence that's brought forth may stand the test of time, and until new evidence is brought forth that might debunk it. So to treat it, this is all predicated on the theory of evolution, which again is a theory. So I do really want to drive that home, because that's largely what this is all predicated on, whether it's the spiritual eugenics component or whether it's the biological evolutionary survival of the fittest type of notion. But the Barbara Marx Hubbard and her acolytes and disciples are much more of the spiritual evolution camp. And, they talk about conscious evolution. Conscious evolution was actually a foundation that she had that was funded largely by the Rockefellers. They were very invested in a lot of theosophical movements, and that was one of their major patronages over the years. And she was also involved in HeartMath. Huge proponent of using this technology, which is like biofeedback type of bioresonance type technology. And, there's definitely some, as we said, by electromagnetic field. We don't deny that. But she's talking about using it for global coherence. And now they're talking about not just heart coherence, but, brain and heart coherence, which sounds a little bit like they're using technology to force some sort of a noosphere. But she's got some really wild ideas. She talks about, as you said, culling the population, but that it's we have to cull the population because the selfish can't go forward. So she talks about, it's very reminiscent of people like Alice Bailey. If you've read, I wrote a pretty extensive article on the hierarchy of the conclave. The externalization of the hierarchy that was predicted for 2025. And she has her and Blavatsky have all of these concepts, root races, and, who are the more evolved and who should be able to move forward and ascend to the higher levels of mastery. And then the others should be subsumed and reincarnated because they don't have the spiritual mastery to go on. And that's very much what Barbara Marx Hubbard talked about. And I'll just, I can see you want to say something. I'll just wrap.
No, it's just, she was shocking to me. I have down on my notes, Barbara Marx Hubbard. Wow.
She was a wow. So here's another wow. She talked about how she was very good friends with Buckminster Fuller. And she called him Bucky. And she talked about how she told her dear friend Bucky that she took it upon herself to rewrite the New Testament because, it needs rewriting. And she's, of course, the first to do it. person to do it because there's no hubris there. She's not selfish or no ego issues. And Bucky told her how proud he was of her and that he had thought of doing it, and he was so proud that she took it upon herself to rewrite the New Testament. She also talks about Christ being transhuman, and she doesn't mean it in a divine kind of transcendent way, transhuman. So she had a lot of very interesting kind of scary. There's that one video I linked where she talks about eating babies, and it may have been a slip, but
Right.
with what I know of her, it's a little disturbing. So
Right.
I don't know.
Certainly.
Yeah,
Do you-
but she was a huge influence on people like Zach Stein, Mark Gaffney, Kenneth Wilber. So they wrote this document. It's the first principles and first values of evolving perennialism, 42 propositions on cosmoerotic humanism. And it looks to me like the blueprint for the Club of Rome. I mean, that's really what it looks like. It's this whole redesign for the image of man and man's perception. It's kind of an extension of Stanford Research Institute's Changing Images of Man, right? This is Willis Harman, who was the chairman of the Institute of Noetic Sciences for 2 decades. And he was involved in this research on the changing images of man. Interestingly enough, Barbara Marx Hubbard was very influenced by Abraham Maslow, who was the humanist psychologist and who coined the term eupsychian. And he had this notion of eupsychian network. So with the Changing Images of Man document, I think it's very interesting because the first iteration of it was around 1971. They did the final publication in 1984. And then Willis Harman's assistant was the pseudonym, Marilyn Ferguson, to publish The Aquarian Conspiracy, which popularized the ideas for, the masses. But it was the ideas that were in this Changing Images of Man document. And it was all about moving out of the age of Pisces, which is focused on the individual. Too competitive, we can't have that. We need to move into the age of Aquarius, which is collective, collaborative. These are all the ideas that Barbara talks about as well. We need to become one. There's no distinction. It's very interesting if you listen to Robert Mueller talk about. He was Secretary General of the UN for 4 decades and very involved in our education system, right? He created the World Core curriculum, which was predicated on Alice Bailey's Education in the New Age. And in that document, the 2000 ideas, which I think became 4,000, because he was such a visionary, but he talked about planetics. And planetics to me comes straight out of Abraham Maslow's document, Politics 3, where he published it. They published it posthumously. Bertha Maslow brought it to Willis Harman, and it was published right around the same time, 1971. And he brought it to Willis Harman and Robert Cantor. And this document, Politics 3, talks about holistic politics. And it also talks about this concept of eupsychian networking. So the eupsychian network, most people are familiar with Maslow in terms of the hierarchy of needs, which was very influential on people like Ken Wilber. So we see how this is all interconnected.
Yeah.
But this idea of the hierarchy of needs, really what he wanted to focus on, his passion was being values. He called them B values. And this was people who were evolved enough, right? The spiritual evolution, they were evolved enough to focus on things that really matter, like religion and politics, so that they could, of course, advise us plebeians who just weren't evolved enough. And he calls it the eupsychian networking. And Barbara said that he taught her about eupsychian networking, and it was the most exciting thing to her because it was better than sex. She calls it supra-sex. And this gets us to cosmoerotic humanism, where Mark Gaffney talks about how it was like this, synchronistic, synergistic moment, and they co-created the term of cosmoerotic humanism. And so they're kind of adjacent. We've got the Ken Wilber, who inspired a lot of this game B concept. A lot of it is based on integral theory. We've got Zach Stein, who is a game B proponent. He's directly involved in game B. He's also a member of the Club of Rome. So is Nora Bateson as well, who was involved in creating. She's also a proponent of game B, and she was involved directly in making the film in initiation to game B. And then we've got Mark Gaffney, who is doing his Eros Mystery Schools with Aubrey Marcus, who it says that Gaffney is his guru to expanded monogamy, which is the most sacred, but it's just a rebrand, a new name for polyamory.
Oh my.
Yeah, so we've got all these kind of concepts that are very intertwined into this, and they are very much inspired by Barbara Marx Hubbard's idea of conscious evolution, which I try to, impress upon people that it's all rooted in eugenics. So whether it's people like Elon Musk who are talking about genetic enhancement and genetic selection using advanced technologies or otherwise, that's under the umbrella of positive eugenics, or whether it's the people who, because we can't have people who are selfish and lack a degree of empathy. They don't have these certain values that she holds dear. They cannot advance to the next because we are a part of the super organism of humanity, right? That's the co-creation, is we're going to move to the next stage where we're non-rivalrous because we need to be one. This is the noosphere.
So is this based in, I mean, do you consider this to be a religion for these people? And if so, do you think that it is, because this is one of the things that we hear about, even with Project Bluebeam, that essentially they are gradually trying to break down, and I do feel like they have done this in the parties, and I think it's been pretty obvious, like especially in the Conservative Party, for example, you had when Trump was chosen to be the one, right? Then you had Never Trumpers, then you had MAGA, then you had Q, and now you have all of these groups within that or under that umbrella that are continuing to fracture. They're disagreeing about, well, okay, I was with you all the way until warp speed. I was with you all the way until the Epstein situation, or those that continue to be, on his side, whatever that may be. But anyway, just that there's all of these divisions under what used to be the umbrella of people that were conservative or Republican. So I feel like the exact same thing has been happening in very traditional religious structures that are very well worn. For example, we saw and I don't know, this is speculation on my part for sure, but I feel like if you have a newspaper, which I believe was it the Boston Globe that originally broke the story about the scandal within the Catholic Church of the child abuse. But either way, whatever it was, I feel like that was allowed to happen at that time, and that it was intentionally done to start spreading the message to cause people to start losing a little bit of the faith that they had in this trusted institution. And then we hear with something like Project Bluebeam, like that they have the New World Order and the New World Religion or whatever, and that they're trying to move everybody to that. And it may be some amalgamation of all of these. I don't know. So I just want to get your thoughts on what is the religion, or is this something that they are creating? And the other question that I have in regards to that is we hear a lot about some of the occult symbolism that we see in Hollywood, and we have these Masonic influences, and then some people say that they're satanic influences. So what do you think is really going on here?
So I have my section 5, I guess chapter 5, depending how you look at it. I talk about the philosophical underpinnings of this movement, and the point I was really trying to make here is that I don't want this to be interpreted as like I think these are all malevolent. There's a lot of useful idiots in the movement, and I don't mean like that they're idiots. These are actually very smart people, but they're being used, and I don't necessarily think they're nefarious at heart. But and that's not to say there aren't people who are. I mean, of course there are. But I think there are people who are involved in this who are genuinely of the mindset that this is the best forward for humanity. And but what I tried to explain is that the philosophical underpinnings are inherently going to lead you to transhumanism and technocracy. So even like a lot of these game B proponents will say they're opposed to transhumanism. They're opposed to, like enforced kind of a technocracy. Whether they use those terms or not, that's what they allude to. And they may think that that's true, but they're not examining the roots of their philosophical presuppositions and foundation that guide them in that way, that are basically leading to rule by philosopher kings, that are leading to efficiency, that are leading to the one, right? The Neoplatonic underpinning. So when you ask if it's a religion, I would definitely classify as a religion. And it's I use, and I know people don't love when I do this, but I use little g Gnosticism as an umbrella. I recognize they were a very specific sect, between the 1st and 3rd century, and they were proclaimed Christian heretics. And I recognize that that's a very specific time stamp in history and a specific group. But I do see a lot of there is a shared value and worldview amongst a lot of these occult and philosophical movements, and even the Neoplatonic, right? There's this pantheistic or panentheistic underpinning. There's this self-apotheosis kind of and for those who aren't familiar with the term, is just a fancy way of saying like a self-divinity where you become your own God.
Right. Very much.
Yeah, and I see that as something that's very shared amongst these people. There's also this common kind of notion that we are trapped here on Earth. This an ignorant demiurge has created this world and withheld knowledge from us. So he's really evil because we're limited. We don't have the gnosis, but for the spiritually evolved, they can get initiated through various stages, and they can get the gnosis, and maybe the light bearer will illuminate them, and so that they can become God. And then of course there's this idea that Mother Earth, right? So it's this worship of the creation instead of the creator. Right, the earth, and where it's all the divine shards, not sharks, the divine shards within, and that I was thinking the divine sparks within. So they have this notion that it's because if it's pantheistic, everything is one and everything is God. So I do think it all falls under this what I would call little g Gnosticism umbrella. Certainly Hermeticism is in here. We see so many elements of Hermeticism. The first principle of Hermeticism is all is a mind. This is like the Descartesian notion of the mind-body dualism, and he decides rationalism, extreme rationalism, is really the answer. And then we have, which I think really paved the way for this Gnostic meditation, of course, as well. So you have those principles. You've got the alchemical principles, right? We're taking these, I call it technological immunization of the eschaton. Whether it's because
touch on that a little more. I don't know if I had to look that up, and I understand it now. So would you please define that
yes. So
for the viewers?
Technocracy of the eschaton is a political term that means to bring heaven on earth. And it's this idea that the human beings are going to create heaven on earth, and they're going to speed up the end time, this apocalyptic state, so that we can get to the stage where we will, of course, have this, there are various sects of this belief system, but perennialism is one of them, where you have that 1,000-year reign. And so we're going to that if we speed up the apocalyptic event, then we can get to this blissful stage where we'll all live in this heaven on earth. But I call it the technological immunization of the eschaton, where you see this with a lot of these tech optimists, these transhumanists, and these technocrats, where they want to create their vision of what will be. To me, it's a dystopia, and it would be hell on earth, I think. But in their mind, it's heaven on earth, but it's a simulacra, because it's not reality, right? Human beings are mortal. We are flawed. We will never become perfected beings. I don't believe that AI will ever achieve the sentience that they are trying to convince us of. And so, but if they can merge these technologies and create a simulacra, right? Like a fake variation. So best way to think of a simulacra would be if like you have a strawberry, it's the real thing. It's an organic, juicy strawberry with all the seeds. And then we have these GMO strawberries, and maybe they don't have seeds on them because those are pesky, and, they're gritty and they don't taste as good, or bugs get to them. And so we have these GMO version. Then we have, we want something really palatable and pretty for kids, right? So we make these candies, and it might have some strawberry flavoring, and maybe at one point they actually use strawberry juice. Now we get to, okay, they made a completely fake version. It's called strawberry, but it's just some synthetic chemicals. That's a simulacra. So now you've got the strawberry flavored juice that doesn't even have any juice in it, but it's got the strawberry essence. So that's the best way to think of a simulacra. And that's what I envision, is they're trying to create create this simulacra here on Earth, but it's this utopia. It's this heaven on earth that's a fake reality designed by man through the advances of technology. And so I do see that's a shared kind of premise, because in a way that is self-apotheosis, right? Man is becoming gods, and a lot of these Game B figures talk about that, right? We wield the power of gods, but then of course we need the benevolence and wisdom of gods. So they're already using kind of that language, and I don't think they mean it to be pejorative, or I don't think they realize that that's even elitist, and I don't even know that they think of it as an inversion of a religious framework. That, I really think it's just about your worldview. And so that's what's so important. That's why I did that section. I know it's a little bit heady. I really tried to break down the terms so that it's not just, for people who aren't familiar with philosophical jargon, but it is so important for people to understand the ontological, epistemological, metaphysical, kinds of roots that lay the foundation, and the differences that where one is really rooted in our founding, which is that it's codified in the Declaration of Independence, that we were endowed with inalienable rights from our Creator, the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But those rights are intrinsic to our being. They're not about property rights. They're not about, exclusionary laws. This is natural law, and you don't have to be a Christian to subscribe to this worldview, to this ontology. Of course, if you are, then it's probably inherent, even if you didn't know that that's the worldview you adopted. But I'm not saying you have to be Christian to come from that ontology. However, their ontology is very different. It's anthro-ontology. That's what they call it in the Cosmorotic Humanism document, which means that it's a self-constructed ontology, as opposed to us being the creation, and we're made in the image of, but that allows for so much manipulation, and it allows for this kind of enmeshment with these technological infrastructures that they're trying to create. I know that sounds a little heady, but hopefully I try to break it down so that people can, because it's so important for people to understand. And I really do want to make the point. I'm giving benefits out. It's about the worldview. And so I do religion, and I would say it's kind of a whether it's a Neoplatonic, whether it's I just use little g Gnosticism, because the other point I was making was where they feel like we're trapped. So we need to get out of that trap, right? So we can get to the pleroma, fulfill the of the pleroma. And then the other concept is this notion of freedom and liberation. And I touch on this, I'm in the middle of the book, but I have the preview on my Substack for Hegel's Dialectic and Gnostic Jacob's Ladder and a Machinery of Control. But all of these ancient mystery cults kind of had this shared worldview. They do talk about this unity of opposites that leads to transcendent, but they also talk about this, how we are trapped, and they talk about need to be liberated and freed. And so they use the term freedom, which Barbara Marx Hubbard talks about all the time, like radical freedom. And it's a little bit misleading, in my opinion, because when they talk about freedom, they're talking about like what Hegel would call the Weltgeist, which is this world spirit that becomes liberated, but it's collective end. So it's the world spirit collectively freed, which to me isn't real freedom, because the end God is the state, which has control then over the human. And humans have no individual free will without complete subservience to the state, is what he said. So that is not the same thing as free will, which free will is individual. It is a gift from our Creator that is a conduit. It's not an end. It's a conduit. It's a vehicle for us to choose virtue and morality. And the hope that we do, that's the hope from our Father, if that's the worldview you subscribe to, that we will be good stewards, and that's the path that we will take through the lessons we learn. That of course we will sin, because sin literally means to miss the mark. We're humans, we will miss the mark, but hopefully over time we will refine that, and we will orient ourselves towards choosing the good, the beautiful, and the true.
Cecilia in the chat asked me to ask you about our friends Vivek Ramaswamy and J.D. Vance, and if you don't want, you can take the fifth.
So I do touch on, I don't mention Ramaswamy so much in the Phoenix Conspiracy article, although I have done shows where I've mentioned him quite a bit. You can just look at his Roivant history. I think that says a lot about his character. I don't know if I need to see much more. But J.D. Vance, and I do really go into this in the Phoenix Conspiracy, is very much inspired by, I mean, he was a protege of Peter Thiel, and he is very adjacent to all of these Theo Bro type of Christian nationalist communities. And I'm not saying Christian nationalism as a people who are in favor of nationalism and are Christians. That's not what I'm saying. This is a very specific term that they themselves use. They say they're Christian nationalists. Now, I do want to differentiate between nationalism and patriotism. They're not the same thing. I think they're conflated often. But even so, even if you were a nationalist, that is not really, they are saying they want to subvert the Constitution to have it replaced with biblical law. Regardless of your thoughts on that, that is a blatant violation of our First Amendment that obliterates the very First Amendment of the United States Constitution republic. So it is diametrically opposed, and they have a lot of ideas that are very autocratic, very authoritarian, and it's under the banner of using Christianity. So it's concerning to me because I see a lot of what I call Christianese being and it's appealing, and especially through the right-hand path. A lot of the right conservatives tend to be more, there are a lot of Christians in the conservative movement, a lot of them are traditionalist. And so when they hear these terms like Christ consciousness, they think, oh, they're speaking my language, but they don't realize this is the language of Alice Bailey. This is the language of, Madame Blavatsky. And they're not talking about Jesus Christ at all. They're talking about the world teacher,
Right.
Lord Maitreya, potentially the Antichrist, depending on your perception. So J.D. Vance is very much steeped in both. He is inspired by Peter Thiel, these kind of network state concepts, these tech bros, and then also these Theo Bros and Christian nationalists. So it's concerning. My view is that they would love to have him fill the shoes, and that he's really being groomed to do so, and that he's the ultimate leader for the technocracy. So
I agree. Are we to the point where we're about ready to start wrapping up? We're getting close to 2 hours now.
you guys.
Are there any other points you'd like to make, or
I think, we covered quite a bit. I really encourage people to read it, to go through, because there's so many links. So like you were doing, I know it takes people away a little bit to go, but I, definitely don't take my word for it. That's why I spent so much time sourcing this, because this way you can take it up with the sources.
it really made a big difference.
Thank you. That was a huge part of the effort. And, wherever I made speculations, I made it very clear that that was my speculation. I can't prove it. And that's for your discernment. But it does really look like there's a huge transhuman and technocratic agenda. And I think it's an anti-human agenda, whether they realize it or not. And that is my hope, that we can raise some awareness to push back against some of it, because they're really ramping up. Accelerationism is like an understatement with how fast things are moving.
Yes.
Administration with the Genius Act he just signed, the Stable Act coming, and the Clarity Act. And this is all trying to pave the way for a new, I think, economic infrastructure that paves the way for a tokenized world. And when I say tokenized, I don't just mean economy. I mean, they want to tokenize medicine, assets, everything. And so when they say you'll own nothing and be happy, I don't know about the be happy part, unless we're just going to grow to love our servitude. We'll be all,
or we'll be drugged.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, I don't know. We'll just be in Huxley's Brave New World. But I do think the own nothing part is what they're aiming towards, because they will probably do some sort of, like, there's a sovereign debt crisis that's looming, and they will probably do some sort of debt jubilee. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I could foresee that could be a potential, and people would be all excited about that. But then that means they seize all the assets. And so I only say these things not to be a doomer, or to even say that that's what's definitely going to happen. I don't know. But for people to be aware, and so that we could push back, because we can't defeat a threat we don't know exists. So
Exactly. that's why I feel like your work with this is so important, because if we take the time, we really can understand the threat a lot better and what we're up against. So the information is really crucial and key. And I find that actually there in so many ways we're being denied our history and our of the various beliefs that so many of us have or take for granted. And sometime today, I'm going to have to listen to the Fifth Dimensions. This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius, which was released around 1970 also, which I think is when you said the document was finished. So Ashley, would you like to ask any final questions or?
Well, I think that we really did cover it, because basically I think that my main question was, what would you say in your summary really is what this is headed towards? But I think you've been very clear about that. This is a transhuman ideology, and that is really the goal, to get there for whatever means, whether it is religious, whether it is to, tyrannical control of the people, all the above, whatever. But the other thing that I would say is that if there is a positive message or an encouragement or something that you wanted to pass along to people that that could be on the bright side, or that could be, I don't know, in the field of gratitude, right? Like I definitely have gratitude. I have gratitude for this conversation and for people like you doing the work to bring this to light. And, but I'm not a doomer. In spite of all of this, and I'm not saying that you are or anyone here is, but I'm just saying, like, I'm not. I'm just not. And I believe that if I feel comfortable in my religious or in my convictions, in my religious beliefs, and I feel comfortable in my relationship with God, that it is a struggle in this earthly realm. And these types of things could be part of that struggle, and that the plans have been in the works for a very long time or whatever. I want to be aware of it, and I want to know what's going on and of the plans and the history, but I just am not going to despair over it. So, and I don't feel like you're despairing either, right? Like, you're working on a lot of different projects. You present the information that does not come across as doomer to me. It comes across as, educational. So if you just want to touch on that, or, like what you do to protect yourself in, in this kind of a crazy environment that we find ourselves.
Yeah, so absolutely. I do not feel like that there's no hope. I'm not a doomer at all. I would not put this kind of work in if I thought there was no hope. This is a tremendous endeavor. So the work that I do, I spent a tremendous amount of time and energy and effort, and it is dark. So I would not bother if I thought that there was no hope. My aim is to be educational. I think, unfortunately, so many of us have not, received an education that has brought much of this to light at all. And I think just the opposite. A lot of us have been indoctrinated. A lot of propaganda through the culture has, we live in a society of cult of personality where, and that's kind of a natural tendency for humans, unfortunately. So we tend to look to various gurus instead of adjudicating the information itself. Because newsflash, a broken clock is right two times a day, right? So if you really just adjudicated the information instead of glorifying or vilifying the source, I think we'd live in a very different world. But unfortunately, that's not the world we live in. So I know this might ruffle some feathers, or some, idols may be killed in the process, right? Kill your heroes is that AWOL Nation song. And it's been kind of a mantra for me. And it's not. We also, and part of the reason dialectics are so effective is because we do tend to, our mind wants to reduce things to binary. So people are either all good or all bad. And that's far from the reality of human nature. So, some of these people may be involved in things that I don't think are all that great, or they're vetting agendas that I'm not in favor of, but I don't think they're inherently like terrible people. I mean, I will say I've met Brett Weinstein, and he was actually very pleasant, like lovely to talk to. He's obviously very bright. I don't think he's necessarily like an evil person, but I don't love these plans for game B. I think some of them have very, deleterious implications for the future of humanity, whether intentional or otherwise. So what I would say in terms of like hope for people, though, is that we right now we still have our free will. And it's interesting. I said this from the beginning that I started the podcast because I felt the free will of humanity was in jeopardy. And how hubristic of me to think that I could be a part of preserving the free will of humanity. I certainly don't claim to, that I will do that single-handedly. But really, I want people to be aware that that is what's at jeopardy. And it is so, I think it's such a beautiful gift. No matter how much I may disagree with people and how frustrating that may be, how beautiful is it that they have their own unique mind and experience and makeup psychologically, physically, genetically, all of those things that, familially, their environment and circumstances, all these things that make them who they are, that lend themselves to the way they think, the solutions they come up with, their analyses of problem, the creativity, the beautiful art that we see that two people could paint the exact same thing. Even if they did, it would look different because they're different people and they have different approaches and talents and perspectives and skills. So I want people to exercise their free will. We saw in the past 5 years, during the COVID era, if you will, how many people were so willing to turn over their free will, how many people were willing to be coerced into, giving over very basic liberties like the right to breathe the air and to, expel their biological waste without obstruction.
Right.
I mean, so basic, and people rolled over. And so I want people to recognize that the free will is like one of the most beautiful gifts that we could possibly have been endowed with. And it is incumbent upon us to preserve it. And one of the things that we can do, there's not, people want a smoking gun. Like, what's the solution to all of this? I don't have that answer. I apologize. But what I can say is I do believe we were all endowed with unique gifts, strengths, talents, and passions. And so we can use that to guide us to the areas where we feel we can be of service. So if you are somebody who is a farmer and you're really passionate about farming, maybe push back against some of these climate smart commodity projects that they're trying to enforce, and these technologies that they're trying to create and force us to use to measure our greenhouse gas emissions, whatever. That's just one example. We saw during COVID, so many moms were getting involved because they were horrified when they saw what their kids were learning over Zoom. And they started, becoming members of the school boards and, speaking up against the curriculums and maybe taking their kids out of the school system. I mean, whatever, it's going to look different for different people. It might just mean having family dinners. That sounds simple, but, if you spend time with your loved ones and have in-person real conversation, the value of that, the values that you can impart to your children and to your loved ones, I mean, that's invaluable. That's not something that I don't think it can be replaced. And the ripple effects of that is so powerful. So, unfortunately, we want like the one answer, the one solution, but I think it's really incumbent upon each of us. And that's where there's so much hope because there's so much we can do. I do think in terms of politically, a lot of people have lost a little hope in the political system. And I understand that. That does not mean we should run to this independent third way that's going to usher in the technocracy. That's not the answer, in my opinion. But I do think locally, there are a lot of things we can do to prohibit some of these technocratic bills. So, we can ban some of these tech ed in local schools. We can ban some of these, there's just the two topics I was very involved in my state were like the, conservation easements and the farming stuff. So, and the school choice. So, those are two arenas I'm very versed in, but there's no limit, right? Like you can push back on the water if they're going to put nanotechnology or whatever it might be. I don't know, but, find something you're passionate about, something you know a lot about, and something where your skills and talents lend themselves, and get involved locally. Start talking to people in your community who have, shared concerns, and see what you can do, because really starts with pushing back against some of those bills.
That was absolutely beautifully said. Thank you so much. And that's my philosophy: guard your humanity and also nurture your humanity. push back against the AI. In my opinion, I am heavily in favor of maintaining the arts and what you were talking about is creative expression, which is the beauty of being human, the true beauty of the different gifts that we all have from God to express ourselves and to create, which may possibly be usurped by AI and by this whole transhumanist agenda. And so, in my opinion, that's how we push back, is to guard our humanity and nurture our humanity, and in our children and our grandchildren, and in just in the world in general. And we all have a part to play and can be a huge impact. Are you aware of the Lonesome Lands podcast? Agriculture. You need to check it out. I'll send you the link. They are a couple of ranchers who are very active and very well informed, and I think they'd be right up your alley.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I shared their channel on Guard's show yesterday. So Sean, go ahead and share your contact information and how we can get a hold of you and subscribe to your Substack and possibly get some tallow with honey and vanilla.
Yes. So I just have one more thing. I'm not a Luddite. Like I'm not the most tech savvy person in the world, but I certainly think technology has tremendous, benefits. We're talking right now through a digital interface. So it's my concern is when it is wielded for control and when it's takes away from humanity. But there's so much that technology can do to enhance humanity. So it's a lot of it is about whose hands it's in and what it's being used for. Anything can be used for good or for evil, I believe. So I just wanted to throw that in there. I'm not saying that we should all go and return to the pre-technological, although some people choosing to, and that's their purview, and I understand. I understand the inclination, but so yeah, I just want to add that. But yes, you can find me. Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure. Love talking to both of you ladies. So great insights, and it was a super fun conversation. I can be found at CourtenayTurner.com. I spell my name like Courtenay. It is pronounced Courtney, but the spelling is Courtenay. So it's COURTENAY. TURNER.com. That's where you can find all of my podcasts. So whatever platform you prefer. I am back on YouTube. It is limited, so I don't put the full video there, but we have a little presence there that they finally let me get over 1,000, which is super exciting. So growing on there because I know it's still where everyone goes. Not everyone, but it's a large audience there. So at least still I have a presence. But I'm on almost every other platform you could find, and my various social media. So that's at CourtenayTurner.com. Of course, all the ways you can support my work is there as well. And it goes a long way because there aren't enough hours in the day for me to work a 9 to 5 and to do this, unfortunately. So it really does help. And it actually costs quite a bit just to have like the subscriptions and keep the show going and all of that. So the Tallow will be out hopefully in September. So stay tuned for that. I will be posting. And then my Substack, which is where all of my podcasts go early access. So to reward those that do pay for the subscription, you will get it early, and you will also get it ad-free. So I do not put ads. You've already contributed. So it's my way of thanking you for that. And also my articles, they're not all paywalls, but this was really, I put so much effort into it. I really wanted to thank the people, and I might do like maybe a short term, like open it up kind of thing, but because I know the information is so important for people. But that is CourtenayTurner.substack.com. And again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Wonderful. Ashley, where can we find you?
So you can find me. I'm on Twitter. You can email me at thinkchangerepeat@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments or anything like that. And I appreciate, Courtenay, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I have loved the conversation. I loved your article tying everything together. And I did want to chime in that a neat little benefit of if you are behind the paywall, even on the free articles, you get the option to listen to the article. I mean, it's not as good like if you were reading it yourself. However, if you're trying to, let's say you read it, but sometimes you need to go through this information again, to listen to it while you're doing whatever is a nice little benefit. So that's something.
So that they do that automatically. Oh, that's awesome.
Yep.
I didn't even, how ignorant I am, because I was thinking of doing that just for my paid, but I didn't know how to make that accessible and not have double feeds.
Yeah.
Oh, they do it. That's brilliant. Okay.
Yep. So like with the most recent article, you can listen to it if you are paid subscriber. So it's a nice little benefit in addition to everything, having full access to your work. So, but yeah, thank you so very much. And I also want to shout out the chat. Karen, I don't know if you want to run through people. I made the list, but I want to thank everybody for being here with us today. It's been a super active chat. This is the best chat. I always say that, and I mean it. And we really appreciate y'all so much.
Yeah, I was going to run through the list, and I wanted to say thank you to Do Not Obey for the nice donation. He said he was late, and so that was his late fee. We don't charge a late fee, but thank you so much. And also this week is our friend Melanie's birthday this week. So happy birthday to Melanie. And prayers for everybody, for Cecilia and her mom, and for everybody who is in need of prayer, and for all of us. And so I'll run through the chat really quickly. Lieutenant Oracle of Truth, Little Johnny Boy, Providence Winds, Doc Spoiler, Opossum King, Denver Attaway, Robin Lee, Anything is Possible, which is our friend Ricky, who was on with us a couple of weeks ago, Sweets, Ronnie Omelets, Prairie Flower, Spirit of the Age, Angry Tiger, Gardner Goldsmith, our friend, Cecilia, Tony Ty, who I met on Angry Tiger's show last Wednesday. That was really a lot of fun. And Me More, Nostradamus, Twisted on Twitter. Thank you for joining us on Twitter, Twisted. Occult Priestess, our friend Occult Priestess. Nature Boy Dave has a podcast on Fridays at 5 o'clock Pacific, the Third Rail podcast. Our friend Deb Bridemack, great to see you, Deb. Will Tabox and Gonzo Johnny, Dustin Helm, Patty Wax, and Do Not Obey. So thank you to everybody so much for joining us. I'm on Twitter, Karen Carpenter, KRCARPE, and every Saturday on Nights of the Storm. And it's always so much fun to spend some time with you. And I hope everybody has a great weekend. Thank you so much, Courtenay and Ashley. I had an awesome time.
Yeah, me too, Karen. Thank you so much for everything, for hosting today. And I'm going to go ahead and sign us out.
Okay.
Thank you.